Your doctor wrote 2 words on a notepad: high blood pressure. Then they wrote a prescription for amlodipine, shook your hand, and the appointment was over. You walked out with a pill. No explanation of what it actually does inside your body. No conversation about what created the problem in the first place. Just take this once a day, see you in 3 months. And here's what most men never find out until much later. Amlodipine doesn't fix anything. It manages something. And there's a very specific reason why men who understand that difference get far better outcomes than men who don't. That's what today is about. I've worked with men over 45 for most of my career. The ones who truly get their blood pressure under control, the ones whose arteries are genuinely healthier at 60 than at 55, they share one thing. They understand what's happening. Not just which pill to take, but why it works, and what makes it work better or worse. Before we get into the mechanism, I want to mention something. Over the past year, I put together a written guide specifically on natural approaches to blood pressure support, dietary protocols, specific minerals, daily adjustments that research consistently shows can meaningfully impact arterial health. It covers the things that simply don't fit into a 7-minute appointment. If you want to have it in hand while we go through this, it's linked in the description right now. I'll come back to it near the end. My patients have found it genuinely useful alongside their medical treatment. Now, let's talk about what's actually happening in your arteries. Most men think of high blood pressure as a heart problem. You see the number, you associate it with stress on the heart, and that's fair. The heart is under more strain when pressure is elevated. But the real story starts somewhere else entirely. It starts in the walls of your blood vessels. Your arteries are not rigid pipes. They're living tissue, surrounded by smooth muscle that contracts and relaxes with every heartbeat. When you're younger and those muscles are healthy, they flex naturally. They give. They absorb pressure and release it. But here's what happens over time. In millions of men in their 40s and 50s, the muscles surrounding those vessels start to tighten chronically. They don't fully relax between heartbeats. They maintain a state of low-level contraction, like a fist that never completely opens. Narrow tube. Same amount of blood trying to get through. Pressure goes up. Now here is the precise biological mechanism behind that tightening. And this is where amlodipine enters the story. For those smooth muscles to contract, to squeeze around the artery and raise your pressure, calcium ions have to enter the muscle cells. This is not a metaphor. This is literal molecular chemistry happening thousands of times per second inside your vascular tissue. Calcium ions flow in through specialized proteins embedded in the cell wall. Scientists call them L-type voltage-gated calcium channels. Think of them as tiny, tightly regulated doors set into the wall of each muscle cell. When those doors open, calcium rushes in, binds to proteins inside, and the contraction signal fires. The muscle squeezes. Amlodipine does one thing, and it does it extremely well. It binds to those channels and sits inside them, physically blocking them. Calcium cannot get through in the same quantity. The smooth muscle around your artery cannot receive its full contraction signal. The muscle relaxes. The vessel widens. Blood flows more freely, and your blood pressure drops. What makes amlodipine particularly useful is how selectively it targets these vessels. It doesn't make your heart beat slower the way some other blood pressure medications do. It doesn't affect your kidneys directly. It works on the mechanism of contraction in the smooth muscle of your arterial walls. That specificity is one reason it has a relatively clean side effect profile for most men. But here's what no one told you. The calcium channel is blocked. The vessel is held open. But the reason that smooth muscle wants to squeeze, the chronic tension, the stiffness that built up over years of high sodium, low activity, accumulated stress, gradual arterial stiffening, that's still there. The medication is keeping the gauge in the safe zone. The underlying engine is still running exactly the same way it was. And that gap between managing a number and actually addressing what created it is the gap that eventually catches most men. Let me give you a real example. A man I'll call David, 58 years old. Blood pressure, 162/94. Slightly overweight, high-stress job, diet built around convenience food. A pattern I see every single week. He started amlodipine. Numbers came down within 2 weeks. David told his wife he was fixed. Stopped reading labels. Went back to his normal routine. Kept taking his pill every morning. 18 months later, he was back in my office. Numbers creeping up again. Doctor talking about increasing his dose. David was frustrated, confused. He'd done everything right, he said. Never missed a pill. Here's what happened. The calcium channels were blocked, yes, but the biological environment around those channels, the sodium overload driving fluid retention, the arterial inflammation from a poor diet, the sustained vascular tension, none of that changed. So the pressure driving the smooth muscle to squeeze kept building underneath, and the medication had to compensate for more and more. David didn't fail. He just wasn't given the full picture. Before we get to what changed for David, let me address the side effects properly, because they deserve a real explanation, not a dismissal. Ankle swelling is the most common, appearing in somewhere between 5 and 10% of people on amlodipine. It almost always creates worry. Men assume their kidneys are struggling or their heart is under strain. Here's the actual mechanism. When amlodipine relaxes the walls of your arteries, it creates a pressure gradient that allows more blood to enter the tiny capillaries at the ends of your legs, your ankles and feet. Some of that fluid seeps out of those capillaries into the surrounding soft tissue. That's the swelling. Your kidneys are not involved in causing this. Your heart is not in danger. This is a peripheral vascular effect, not a systemic one. Elevating your legs for 30 to 40 minutes in the evening helps significantly. Some men find that moderate walking during the day improves circulation enough to reduce the effect. For most men, this side effect diminishes on its own within the first few weeks as the body adapts to the new arterial tone. Flushing, warmth in the face, redness, a feeling that your skin is running hot, can happen in the early weeks. Your arteries are wider than they've been in a while. Blood is reaching capillaries in your face and neck with more ease. Your body is recalibrating to wider arterial diameter as its new baseline. For the vast majority of men, this fades without any change in dosage. If you've taken Ramipril or another ACE inhibitor before, you know the cough. That persistent, dry, throat-irritating sensation that follows you everywhere. Amlodipine does not cause this. The mechanism is entirely different. Many men are switched to amlodipine specifically because the cough on their previous medication became intolerable. One warning I want to be direct about. Grapefruit juice. There's an enzyme in your gut wall and liver called CYP3A4. This enzyme breaks down amlodipine at the correct rate and keeps blood concentrations within the intended therapeutic range. Grapefruit juice contains compounds that partially suppress this enzyme. The result is that more amlodipine enters your bloodstream than your prescribed dose is designed to deliver. Concentrations can push beyond the therapeutic range. One occasional glass is unlikely to cause a serious problem. But if grapefruit juice is something you drink every morning, and a surprising number of men in their 50s do, switch to something else and mention it to your doctor at your next appointment. This is a simple change with a real impact. Now here is the part that actually changes the outcome. The part David was missing. There is a category of lifestyle interventions, completely natural, nothing prescribed, that research has repeatedly shown can lower systolic blood pressure by 8 to 14 points when followed consistently. For context, a starting dose of amlodipine typically lowers blood pressure by 10 to 15 points. Read that again. The right dietary approach comes within range of a starting dose of medication. Same territory, different mechanism entirely. And when you combine them, they stack. Amlodipine blocks the calcium channel. The right diet changes the chemical environment around that channel, reduces the forces driving the muscle to contract, and improves the elasticity of the arterial wall itself. Different mechanisms, same direction. You're not fighting the same battle twice. You're opening two fronts simultaneously. The most rigorously studied dietary approach for blood pressure is called the DASH protocol. Dietary approaches to stop hypertension. Not a trend, not a social media diet. Studied for decades by institutions specifically focused on cardiovascular outcomes. The principle is built around three foundational levers. Sodium, the most powerful single variable. Most men I see are consuming between 3,000 and 5,000 milligrams of sodium daily, often with zero awareness of it. The target for meaningful blood pressure management is under 1,500 milligrams. The mistake most men make is attacking the salt shaker. That's not the main source. The top contributors are processed foods, canned products, commercial bread, deli meats, restaurant meals, and takeaway food. The salt you consciously add to your plate is a small fraction of what you're actually consuming. One change that makes a disproportionate difference. Cook at home 3 to 4 nights per week instead of ordering in. When someone else prepares your food, you have essentially zero control over sodium content. A single restaurant meal can contain 2,000 milligrams or more. A plate of pasta at a chain restaurant can contain close to your entire daily allowance before you've even looked at the menu. At home, you are in control. That shift alone, for many men, produces visible movement in blood pressure readings within 2 to 3 weeks. Potassium. Genuinely underappreciated. Potassium and sodium operate in direct competition in your cardiovascular system. Higher potassium intake signals your kidneys to excrete more sodium. Less sodium retained means less fluid volume, less pressure on vessel walls. Think of potassium as the counterweight to every milligram of sodium you consume. Bananas get all the attention, but avocados, sweet potatoes, spinach, white beans, lentils, and plain yogurt are actually higher sources. The goal on DASH is 2 potassium-rich foods at most meals throughout the day. No obsessive tracking, just something green on the plate and deliberate variety. Magnesium. This is the one that surprises men most consistently. Magnesium is directly involved in the relaxation of smooth muscle tissue, including the muscles surrounding your arteries. The pathway is different from amlodipine, but the directional outcome is the same. Vessel walls under less tension, more capable of relaxing and widening in response to blood flow. Research suggests 200 to 400 milligrams of supplemental magnesium daily can reduce blood pressure by 2 to 4 points in people with low levels. And studies consistently show that a meaningful proportion of men in their 40s and 50s are below optimal levels without knowing it, because magnesium deficiency doesn't announce itself clearly. Food sources include dark leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, almonds, cashews, and dark chocolate with 70% cacao or higher. If you're adding a supplement, magnesium glycinate or magnesium malate tends to absorb better than magnesium oxide. Worth discussing with your doctor, especially if you're on other medications. Combine sodium reduction, potassium optimization, and magnesium support with amlodipine, and you're doing something fundamentally different from just blocking a channel. You're reducing the biological pressure that drives those vessel walls to want to squeeze in the first place. The medication manages the output. The lifestyle works on the input. Quick question while we're here. When your doctor prescribed amlodipine, did they spend any time talking to you about diet? Specifically about sodium reduction or a dietary protocol for blood pressure? Write yes or no in the comments. I've been asking this across my videos for months. The pattern in the responses tells me a great deal about what's missing from these appointments. Now let me give you the week-by-week timeline. Because understanding what to expect removes the anxiety that leads men to stop their medication too early. And stopping amlodipine without your doctor's guidance is genuinely dangerous. Days 1 through 3. Amlodipine is building toward therapeutic level. You may see a small shift in your numbers, or none at all. This is completely normal. Do not adjust the dose. Do not add a second pill, because nothing appears to be happening. Stay consistent. Days 4 through 7. Blood levels are approaching steady state. Meaningful movement in your pressure readings should begin during this window. If ankle swelling appears, it's most common at this stage. Keep your legs elevated when resting in the evening. It will typically ease within 2 to 3 weeks. Week 2. Flushing begins to ease as your body adjusts to wider arterial diameter as its new baseline. If you started dietary changes alongside the medication, particularly sodium reduction, you may notice your numbers becoming more stable throughout the day, not just lower on average. Less spike in the morning, less variability between readings. Weeks 3 and 4. Men combining medication with dietary adjustments often notice something that surprises them. Not just lower numbers, but less fluctuation. The sharp morning rise begins to flatten. Readings taken at different times of day start converging toward a consistent range. Month 2 to 3. With potassium and magnesium optimization layered in, the stacked effect becomes visible in the data. This is the point where some men come back to their follow-up appointment, and the doctor notes the control is better than expected for the current dose. That is not coincidence. That is 2 mechanisms working in the same direction. Back to David. 4 months after that frustrating visit, the one where his numbers were creeping up and his doctor was talking about increasing his dose, he came back. He'd gone home with a very different mindset, started cooking at home 5 nights a week. Replaced processed lunch options with whole foods. Paid attention to labels. Started taking magnesium glycinate before bed. Dropped the daily grapefruit juice. 3 months later, his blood pressure was lower than it had been when he first started medication, 2 years earlier. His doctor reduced his amlodipine dose at that appointment, under medical supervision, done gradually, with careful monitoring. David wasn't a special case. He wasn't lucky. He finally had the complete picture. And one more thing, because I want to say this clearly before we close. Never stop or reduce amlodipine without your doctor's explicit guidance. Even if your numbers look perfect, even if you feel completely fine, especially then. The reason you feel fine is precisely because the medication is doing its job. Stopping it suddenly can cause a rebound rise in pressure that is potentially dangerous. Any changes to your dosage are a conversation between you and your physician, with monitoring and a clear plan. What you can do, starting today, is create the conditions under which that medication works most effectively, at the lowest necessary dose, for as long as possible. The pill is the floor. Your choices determine the ceiling. If you want the full written protocol, the specific dietary targets, the mineral framework, the practical daily adjustments that support what amlodipine is already doing, the guide I mentioned at the start of this video is in the description below. It covers the DASH framework in full detail, the specific magnesium and potassium targets, and a practical week-by-week approach designed specifically for men in their 40s and 50s. Everything in it is built to work alongside your prescription, not against it. If this gave you something useful today, hit the like button. It helps more men in this exact situation find this information when they need it. Send this to someone who recently started blood pressure medication and still has questions. I'll see you in the next one.